I raised $2 million to build a women's co-working empire. I promised investors we'd revolutionize how women work. I told my community we were creating a safe space free from male energy and competition. 3 years later, I closed the doors for the last time, $800,000 in debt, with angry members demanding refunds and investors threatening lawsuits. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the founder of SheSpace, the women-only co-working company that was supposed to change everything. Today, I'm going to tell you the truth about why it failed. Not the sanitized version I told the press. The real reason. This is my confession. This is the story of how identity politics destroyed a business that should have succeeded. 4 years ago, I was working from a coffee shop in San Francisco, watching my laptop battery die for the 3rd time that week. I looked around and saw a tech bro taking a business call so loud I couldn't think. Another guy had spread his belongings across 4 seats. That's when the idea hit me: what if there was a co-working space just for women? A place where we didn't have to deal with manspreading, mansplaining, or masculine energy. Where women could work, collaborate, and build without male interference. I started sketching the concept that afternoon. SheSpace would be more than a workspace, it would be a movement. Premium amenities, beautiful design, networking events, childcare services, wellness rooms. Everything a modern woman entrepreneur could need. The pitch practically wrote itself. Women control $40 trillion in global spending but own only 36% of businesses. SheSpace exists to change that by creating spaces where women can thrive without patriarchal barriers. My first investor meeting was with a venture capital firm run by women. I walked in nervous, but within 10 minutes, they were leaning forward, nodding, finishing my sentences. They loved it. By the end of the meeting, they'd committed $500,000. This is what the world needs, the lead investor told me. Women supporting women. This is revolutionary. I left that meeting feeling like I'd found my purpose. Within 6 months, I'd raised $2 million from 3 VC firms and a dozen angel investors. All women, all committed to the mission. The press loved us. We got features in TechCrunch, Forbes, Fast Company. I did a TEDx talk about reimagining workspaces through a feminist lens. The waiting list for memberships grew to 800 women before we even opened. I signed a lease on a 15,000 square foot space in downtown San Francisco. Another 10,000 square feet in Brooklyn. We were planning Austin, Seattle, and Chicago next. I hired an all-female team of 12. I was building exactly what I'd imagined, a company where women lifted each other up, free from male competition and ego. Opening day felt like destiny. We opened SheSpace San Francisco in March with a launch party that felt like a coronation. 200 women showed up, entrepreneurs, freelancers, remote workers, investors. There were speeches about breaking glass ceilings and dismantling patriarchy. We toasted with champagne and I felt like I'd made it. The first month, we signed 120 members at $450 per month. Brooklyn opened 2 months later with 95 members. The revenue was coming in. The press coverage continued. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But inside, things were already fracturing. The first issue was the bathroom situation. We'd designed our spaces with all-gender bathrooms to be inclusive to trans women and non-binary members. It seemed obvious, this was a progressive space for all women and woman-identified individuals. Within 2 weeks, I had complaints. Some members were uncomfortable sharing bathrooms with trans women. Others were offended that anyone would be uncomfortable. The Slack channel became a war zone. I called an all-hands community meeting to address it. Big mistake. A cisgender member stood up and said she didn't feel safe sharing intimate spaces with biological males. A trans member started crying. Half the room erupted in anger, the other half in defensive justification. I tried to moderate, to find compromise, but there was none. I ended up alienating both sides. 15 members canceled that week. Then came the pricing complaints. We offered a needs-based discount for women of color and low-income members, 30% off regular membership. It was meant to address equity and make the space more accessible. White members started complaining it was reverse discrimination. Women of color said 30% wasn't enough and that charging them at all was problematic. Someone posted on Twitter that we were performative white feminism disguised as inclusion. I tried explaining our reasoning, but every statement made it worse. We were either not doing enough or doing too much, depending on who you asked. The networking events became another minefield. We hosted a pitch night where women could practice their investor presentations. It was supposed to be supportive and non-competitive. Instead, it turned into a trauma-sharing session where half the women cried about their imposter syndrome and the other half gave feedback so gentle it was meaningless. One woman pitched a dating app. Another member said the idea was problematic because it centered heteronormative relationship models. The founder broke down crying, saying she was just trying to help people find love. The event ended early. I told myself these were growing pains. Every startup has challenges. We just needed to find our rhythm. By month 6, I couldn't ignore what the data was showing me. Our members weren't actually working. I'd installed basic analytics to understand space usage, nothing invasive, just tracking which areas were occupied and when. The numbers were alarming. On average, members spent 2.3 hours per day in the actual workspace. The rest of the time, they were in the wellness room, the meditation space, the community lounge, or the cafe area. Our spaces were beautifully designed, but they'd become more like luxury hangout spots than productive workspaces. I watched women come in, set up their laptops, then immediately migrate to the couch area where they'd spend hours talking about their feelings, their boundaries, their trauma. The trauma sharing became almost competitive, who had overcome more, who had been more oppressed, who deserved more compassion. Don't get me wrong, community is important. Support matters. But we weren't running a therapy center. We were supposed to be a co-working space for professionals building businesses. I started noticing patterns. Women would schedule meetings that turned into 2-hour emotional processing sessions. Working groups became support circles. Every business conversation somehow pivoted to personal struggles. I brought this up carefully with my management team. My head of community, Jessica, got defensive immediately. "This is what women need," she said. "We've been conditioned by patriarchy to prioritize productivity over wellness. We're deconditioning them. This is revolutionary." "But they're not building their businesses," I said. "They're paying $450 a month to not work." "You're centering capitalist productivity metrics," another manager said. "That's internalized misogyny." I left that meeting feeling crazy. Was I wrong? Was I too focused on traditional success metrics? Had I internalized patriarchal values? Then I looked at our member survey results. The data was devastating. Only 23% of members reported their business had grown since joining. 67% said they felt supported but hadn't achieved concrete goals. 45% admitted they were more behind on their work than before joining. Multiple comments said things like, "I love the community but I can't afford to renew because my business isn't making money." We were failing at our core mission, helping women succeed professionally. But we'd created such a strong culture around emotional support and trauma validation that suggesting we focus on actual work felt like violence. Month 8 was when things got truly toxic. We'd tried to build an inclusive space for all women, but instead we'd created a victim hierarchy where members competed for who was most marginalized. It started subtly. In community discussions, women began prefacing comments with their identity credentials, as a queer disabled woman of color. Or speaking from my experience as a neurodivergent survivor. At first, this seemed like good practice, acknowledging positionality and lived experience. But it quickly became a weapon. The more marginalized identities you could claim, the more authority you had. The more your opinion mattered. I watched a white lesbian member suggest a new policy about noise levels in the workspace. She was immediately shut down by a straight black woman who said her perspective was rooted in white supremacy. The lesbian member mentioned she was marginalized too. The black woman said, "Your white privilege still centers you." The lesbian member apologized profusely and left crying. She canceled her membership the next day. These dynamics played out constantly. Every disagreement became about power and oppression rather than the actual issue at hand. You couldn't say, "I prefer quiet work environments," without someone claiming that was ableist against people with ADHD who need stimulation. You couldn't ask someone to clean up after themselves without being accused of perpetuating domestic labor expectations. We created a conflict resolution committee to handle disputes. Within a month, the committee members were in disputes with each other about whose role it was to educate whom. A straight white member got reported for making someone feel unsafe because she mentioned her husband during lunch. Apparently, discussing heterosexual relationships was centering heteronormativity in a queer-inclusive space. I tried to intervene, to bring sanity back, but I'd created a monster I couldn't control. My own staff told me that as the founder, I had too much power, and my voice shouldn't count more than other members. When I pointed out that I literally owned the company, I was accused of flexing capitalist hierarchy. The breaking point came during a community meeting about whether we should display an American flag for a July 4th event. I thought it was straightforward: we're in America, it's a national holiday, sure. But half the members said the flag represented colonialism and imperialism. The other half said removing it was disrespectful to veterans and immigrants who'd fought to be here. A veteran member started crying. An immigrant member said she felt unsafe. The meeting devolved into a 4-hour struggle session where women took turns sharing how the flag made them feel. We never made a decision. The July 4th event was cancelled. 20 more members quit. By month 10, our burn rate was unsustainable. We were spending $180,000 per month between rent, salaries, amenities, and operations. We needed 400 active members across both locations to break even. We had 210, and that number was dropping every week. I called an emergency board meeting with my investors. I came prepared with a turnaround plan: cut amenities, reduce staff, raise prices, and focus on productivity and results over feelings. The response was not what I expected. "This sounds like you're abandoning the mission," one investor said. "We invested in a revolutionary space for women, not a WeWork clone." "We're losing $80,000 a month," I said. "If we don't change course, we'll be bankrupt in 10 months. "Then raise more money," another investor suggested. "Double down on the vision." I looked at them in disbelief. We'd created a business that didn't work. Members weren't succeeding. We weren't profitable. The culture had become toxic. And their solution was to raise more money and keep doing the same thing? "No one is going to invest in us," I said. "Our retention rate is 34%. Our member satisfaction is high, but their business outcomes are terrible. We're essentially a very expensive social club that makes women feel good while their businesses fail." The room went silent. "That sounds like internalized misogyny," one investor finally said. I lost it. "No. It's reality. We built a space that prioritizes feelings over results, and now everyone is broke and traumatized and unable to handle basic professional disagreements." The meeting ended badly. 2 investors wanted me removed as CEO. They said I'd lost the vision and was replicating patriarchal business models. I spent that night going through our finances, our member data, our survey results. The truth was undeniable: we'd failed. Not because the market didn't exist. Not because women didn't need co-working spaces. But because we'd built our entire model on ideology instead of business fundamentals. We'd created a space that felt good but didn't work. I made the decision to close SheSpace 11 months after opening. I couldn't keep losing money. I couldn't keep watching women pay hundreds of dollars to become less productive. I couldn't keep managing a community that had become a victim competition instead of a professional network. The announcement was brutal. Members felt betrayed. They'd invested in the community, built relationships, trusted the vision. Some cried. Others got angry. Many blamed me for giving up on them. The press coverage was savage. Articles accused me of abandoning women, of being unable to handle the challenges of running a women-focused business, of proving that women can't succeed without men. The feminist criticism was especially harsh. I was a traitor, a sellout, someone who'd internalized patriarchy. But you know what hurt most? The private messages from members thanking me. "I'm relieved," one wrote. "I was drowning in debt keeping my membership while my business failed. But I felt like I couldn't quit because that would mean I didn't support women." "I'm so glad it's over," another said. The constant walking on eggshells, worrying that everything I said would offend someone. I couldn't focus on work. I just needed a quiet desk and Wi-Fi, not a struggle session. Dozens of women privately admitted they were relieved. The space had become exhausting. The ideology had become oppressive. They'd been afraid to speak up because criticism meant you were part of the problem. I spent 3 months closing down operations, returning deposits, settling with vendors, and negotiating with investors. I ended up personally liable for $400,000 in debt. My credit was destroyed. My reputation was in tatters. But I learned something invaluable: good intentions don't build successful businesses. Ideology doesn't pay rent. And creating a space for women doesn't mean anything if those women don't succeed. A year after closing SheSpace, I started consulting for a traditional co-working company, one that served everyone, regardless of gender. I watched them operate and realized everything we'd done wrong. They focused on basics: reliable Wi-Fi, comfortable desks, good coffee, quiet spaces, meeting rooms. They didn't try to be a community center or a therapy office or a revolutionary movement. They were just a professional workspace. And their members loved them. Their members, including many women, were productive. They built businesses. They hit their goals. They had normal professional relationships with each other without trauma dumping or identity politics. I started interviewing successful women entrepreneurs about what they actually needed from workspaces. The answers were shockingly simple. Reliable internet and a door that locks for client calls. Childcare nearby, but not in the workspace. I need to focus. Professional networking, not emotional support groups. Results-oriented community where we help each other succeed, not just feel supported. Not one mentioned needing a women-only space. Not one wanted a wellness room more than a private office. Not one prioritized ideology over functionality. I realized we'd built SheSpace around what I thought women should want based on feminist theory, not what professional women actually needed. The women who succeeded weren't spending 2.3 hours per day processing trauma, they were working. They weren't obsessing over identity hierarchies, they were building products. They didn't need protection from male energy, they needed customers, and they didn't care what gender those customers were. I'd confused political ideology with business strategy. I'd mistaken emotional validation for professional development. I built a space that made women feel good about failing instead of helping them succeed. I'm 37 now, no longer running my own company, but helping other entrepreneurs avoid my mistakes. I'm still paying off that $400,000 in debt. SheSpace is a cautionary tale in startup circles: what happens when ideology trumps business fundamentals. But I don't regret it entirely. I learned lessons that will serve me forever. First, good intentions don't matter if the outcomes are bad. We meant well, but we failed our members. Impact matters more than intentions. Second, identity politics is poison for business. The moment you make identity the organizing principle, you create hierarchy, competition, and division. You can be inclusive without making everything about oppression. Third, coddling people doesn't help them succeed. We were so focused on making women feel safe and supported that we never challenged them to be better, work harder, or push through discomfort. Growth requires discomfort. Fourth, not everything needs to be revolutionary. Sometimes people just need a desk, Wi-Fi, and to be left alone to work. Treating basic services as political statements is exhausting for everyone. Fifth asterisk, the market will tell you the truth if you listen. Our members voted with their feet and their wallets. We ignored the data because it contradicted our ideology. If I could go back, I'd build a completely different company. Great workspace, professional community, focused on results and success. Open to everyone who wants to work hard and treat others with respect. No identity politics. No victim hierarchies. No confusing emotional support with professional development. Would it be revolutionary? No. Would it work? Absolutely. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is focus on what actually works instead of what you wish would work. That's what I'm doing now. And maybe that's the real revolution, admitting when you're wrong, learning from failure, and building something better. If my story helps even one entrepreneur avoid the mistakes I made, then maybe the $400,000 in debt was worth it. Maybe failure can be the beginning of wisdom, if you're brave enough to face the truth. What do you think? Have you ever seen ideology destroy something that could have succeeded? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the hard truths of entrepreneurship.